It's just after 11:30, so we'll make a start on this meeting. Good to see everybody here. As the mayor's elsewhere, I'm chairing the meeting today, so I hope everybody behaves themselves for me at today's meeting. So I will turn to the agenda, and the first item is apologies for absence, please.
So the only Chair, the only apologies we've received are from the Mayor.
Okay. Great, thank you. I'll turn to the committee. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest, please? I don't see any. Are there any exempt information, please? No. Great. And I'll turn to the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of September. And is everybody happy with those minutes, please? Take it. They are agreed. So we're going to move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is a Q2 organisational performance. And I'll pass over to Sarah to introduce this item, please.
So that's really good.
Put your microphone.
It did really work. I didn't put the microphone on, so thank you, Chair. So this paper is to provide an update on Q2 performance. I think at your last meeting you had a presentation about Q1 and end of year performance for 2023-24. And obviously the presentation here is just going to pick up some of the key highlights from the paper that I'll take it as that you've all read. So as well as kind of running through the Q2 performance, also just talk a little bit about the performance framework that we're working on to kind of strengthen the approach that we've got across the organisation. So just in terms of Q2, I think key points really are around that confidence in delivery is broadly similar to Q1, but as colleagues will have seen in the paper, there's been a rise in the number of work areas where the risk to delivery have increased, and I think this is quite typical of a move from Q1 into Q2 during the kind of financial year. It recognises that kind of we're progressing actions and we've probably identified a number of areas where we kind of need to kind of have a look at in more detail. I think there's a clear theme arising in relation to kind of resourcing in the paper, which I'll come on to a little while. And I think that's partly to do with some of the kind of the big projects that we're taking forward and kind of the kind of the growth in the organisation. And obviously what you'll see within the paper is that what we started to do is look at the mitigations that are in place to address some of the risks that are arising around those areas where they're kind of being flagged up during this quarter. And as I've just said, that kind of we'll talk about the performance management framework, which is some work that we're taking forward around how we kind of further develop our approach to performance, kind of setting goals and monitoring progress. I think what we're also trying to do is trying to make these reports really clear. And I think we did have feedback, I think particularly from the last report where we were reporting on both end of year and Q1, that it was quite difficult to kind of navigate, and so we are kind of doing a piece of work at the minute to try and improve clarity across the piece. So just in terms of headline outcomes there, there's been a marginal decrease in the outcomes which kind of fully satisfy key requirements that are blue, and you'll see there that there's kind of been a decrease from kind of 44 areas to kind of 39 in Q2. A number of areas, a marginal decline again from blue amber, and a drop from kind of 70 to 64. And then in terms of amber red, there's been an increase from 9 to 19. And you'll see that we've had one area that is introduced into this quarter that is red, and I'll come on to talk about that in a short while. So just in terms of headline outcomes, the table that's in the paper and on the right kind of shows kind of how we're delivering against the 5 missions. And what you'll see there in terms of the number of work areas, there's been a particular change in missions 1, 4 and 5, and that's kind of those areas are outlined a little bit further on when we talk about both improvements and kind of areas that are in a bit of a downward trend. Approximately a quarter of areas of work are reporting a high level risk to deliver than in Q1. You'll see there are 18 work areas that are kind of progressing in an upwards direction, which is really positive. About 31 a quarter that are moving in a downwards direction, and about 74, kind of 60% of areas that have stayed in the same category of performance this time round. And that kind of full outline is displayed in Appendix 1 that I'm sure you've all had a chance to have a look at. Just in terms of Q2, not to kind of run through everything, but there's been a number of areas where we've seen kind of good progress over this quarter. You'll see there the local growth plan is mentioned, and I'm sure a number of colleagues around the table have been involved in kind of the journey of the development of the local growth plan, but that final draft plan is coming to the December meeting for endorsement, then December CA meeting for endorsement, and quite a lot of work's been happening over the last quarter to get that into a position, particularly in terms of kind of developing the robust evidence base, but also consulting with a wide range of partners to get that to where it needs to be. You'll see there in terms of activity around bus stop accessibility improvements, that there's been a number of kind of improvements there which will kind of support improvement across 1,000 bus stops and kind of 14 bus station hubs. So not to kind of go into everything, but you'll get a flavour there of some of the areas where we've seen some really good progress over the last quarter. And in terms of areas perhaps where we've got some challenges, the Adult Skills Fund, I think we had a report to the last meeting of the Combined Authority and around kind of that Adult Skills Fund and some particular challenges we've had with re-procurement, which will potentially going to lead to some slight delays in terms of delivering across the piece there. Brownfield housing, where we've got some negotiation with government about the freedom and flexibilities about final year spend, despite some really good progress that has been happening across the piece around housing at the moment. And you'll see there that the red is flagged around carbon impact reduction. As we're developing our kind of climate and environment plan, one of the key focuses that we're looking at is about how we measure carbon impact. And one of the big things we've been looking at across the organisation is how we bring that together. And it's quite a complex and technical knowledge and expertise that's required. We've lost a member of staff to another job, so we've got a recruitment issue there that we're trying to pick up. But we have flagged that because there is quite a bit of work that we're looking at the moment to be ready to be able to support kind of monitoring and delivery of the climate and environment plan. So that's one that we have got some mitigating actions there. They're kind of in place. So I'll kind of just move on from that and kind of pick up any questions later. But in terms of the issue that I raised at the beginning around kind of the growth in the organisation, the theme around resourcing has kind of emerged during quarter two. And I think there's a number of pieces of work that we're undertaking at the moment to try and kind of look at this in much more detail. And one of those is around multi-year business and budget planning, which is really about us thinking much more to the future and kind of planning across the piece, which we think is going to really help, and that will be introduced from next year in terms of the kind of 2025-26 and onwards. We're doing quite a lot of work at the minute around workforce planning and looking to see how we can make sure that we've got the resources in place to kind of deliver, and we're doing that in conjunction with the work that we're doing around multi-year business and budget planning. Also thinking about smarter working and workforce agility, and how we can kind of really avoid kind of ending kind of cliff edge employment. And some of that has been previously linked to how we've been funded, where we get funding for particular programmes, and that makes it really difficult in terms of being able to kind of keep people. But there's quite a lot of work taking place across the organisation to ensure that we're moving away from that cliff edge, and that we kind of provide a surety to staff so that we're not necessarily getting into a position where we're having to kind of lose people and recruit again. We're also looking at internal governance. We're setting up a performance board, and it's in shadow form at the moment, which is where internally we'll be providing that kind of internal challenge, but also around assurance and accountability. And in the paper it sets out some of the kind of areas that we're looking at in terms of doing that. And what we're trying to do there is empower managers so that we can utilise our resources and our budgets more effectively, and making sure that we're allocating extra time to kind of focus on our priorities. And we've got a number of those, which I'm sure you're all aware of, that kind of need to kind of really make sure we deliver on over the coming year and following years. In terms of next steps, I've just mentioned the performance management framework. We think this is a really important piece of work, not just in terms of just looking at performance around kind of our organisation, but really thinking about how we measure our outcomes, also looking at how we bring in things like risk and compliance, but looking at all of this in the round. And the performance framework will give us a really structured approach moving forward. We're really clear about what we're doing and make sure that we've got that consistency across the organisation that we think we can do to kind of improve the current position. And we're also making sure that we're going to kind of consolidate all our relevant performance metrics into a single reporting process. And we've started work on a new tool that will enable us to do that quite effectively. And that's showing great signs of being able to kind of pull quite a lot of data into one place where we can really have that clarity of where we need to focus our efforts moving forward. And what we'll do is we will be bringing back progress reports, key intervals on development there. And just the final one there is that Q3 performance is scheduled to come to the committee for consideration in February, and we'll be able to provide an update on all of this at that particular point. So I'll stop there, Chair, and just hand over.
Thanks, Sarah. Are there any questions or comments from the committee, please? Jocelyn, please.
Thanks very much for that. Obviously, it's worrying when you see the trends going in the wrong direction, but sometimes the more information you have, the worse it looks. But that's great, because that means you can make it better in the future. I am particularly concerned about the one key staff member disappearing, meaning that there's a big problem with the carbon impact issue. It's very concerning that there isn't sufficient resilience in that particular team, because that's a really important area for the authority. On the wider point of resourcing, I know that there was a bit of delay in recruitment because of the new IT package that was being put in place. There was a bit of a delay in recruitment last year, wasn't there? Yeah. Is that partly why we've got this resource issue now?
Thanks, Jocelyn. So on the issue of the member of staff in the carbon team, they were in a particularly key and technical role, and we are looking to backfill them. The carbon work is now moving again, and we are intending to go out to consult on the new climate and environment plan very, very soon. And we've recently completed a refresh of all the work around carbon pathways, which sets out what we would need to do in order to get to net zero, and so the work is beginning to is progressing, but it's true that we have had a slight delay while we've lost a key member of staff. In terms of the impact of the delays from earlier in the year, there was a particular gap around January and December of last year where we weren't able to onboard people. That's now completely resolved, and we have been, as is set out in the workforce data paper, which we'll see later, we have since then recruited at a decent rate over the year, and we have also reduced the period of time that it takes to recruit people into the organisation, which was something that this committee has discussed before.
Thanks, Alan. Are there any more questions on this? Sarah, please.
It's not a question. I think it's just addressing the first point around sometimes when you see kind of areas of that aren't on track, we start to panic, don't we? Because things aren't going right. But I think it is important that we do start bringing forward much more. You know, that kind of conversation around the things that perhaps we've identified, and I think that's good in terms of kind of the approach that we're taking around the performance framework. So hopefully that's something that we can keep bringing forward.
Thank you. If nobody else wants to come in on item 5, I'll turn to the recommendations on page 7 and take everybody's happy with those recommendations. That's great, thanks. Shall we move on to item 6, which is the Q2 financial position, please? And Gary.
Thank you, Chair. I'll provide the headlines of the report. So it provides the revenue and capital position for the second quarter of the financial year and the forecast position to the year end. If we start with revenue, the position at Q2 is one of net expenditure of 4.7 million against a balanced budget at this point. The variance is, as it was for Q1, largely due to timing differences across the project portfolio. The members will recall that while budgets have been profiled to reflect the expected incidence of income and expenditure, some differences do remain, and as a Q1 we continue to work through with directorates to improve the profiling, and we will take that forward for the rest of this financial year and certainly into next. You'll also notice that in response to feedback from the last meeting, I've included a glossary of terms on the table, so hopefully that provides further clarity as to what's in each item of income and expenditure. The forecast revenue position at the year end shows a small deficit of around £700,000. So we have identified during the current year financial risks of over £28.5 million and managed to mitigate around £21 million of those through current funding. That leaves around £7.4 million of pressures which have been included in the year-end position. And the bulk of these pressures, some 7.3 million, are in transport and largely relate to Bradford interchange and concessions, and a small pressure of £100,000 relating to software in DTS. So in terms of funding those pressures, we agreed a release from the Transport Reserve at the July meeting of the CA of £3.5 million, and there's also a forecast overachievement of income of around 3.2 million by the year end, which is largely driven by additional enterprise zone income. In terms of forecasting, we're now focusing on risks and opportunities to further inform the expected year-end position. The mitigated risks, both for this financial year and into 25-26 and beyond, are largely centred around transport and are still moving. They are largely related to bus tendered services, Bradford bus operations and operator reimbursements. These have the potential to result in further cost pressures as we move through the year, and we are of course keeping all of these under review as we go forward. Moving on to capital then, so expenditure at Q2 was nearly 115 million, which is around 29% of the total forecast spend for the year end. Just for comparison, at this point last year spend was 103 million, which was 32% of the forecast. We're broadly in line with where we were last year in terms of spend. The total forecast spend for the year is expected to be around £396 million, which is a reduction of around £80 million on the indicative forecast that we set out in February. They are across all of the major programmes, and further detail of these reductions is set out in the paper. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Are there any questions, please? Jocelyn, please.
I feel like I raise this at every meeting, but again, we seem to have an overspend on consultancy and professional services, and you've helpfully put out what that is made up of. But even on a quarter, it's £1 million, and it seems to happen every quarter that we're consistently under budgeted. So, what's going on here?
I don't necessarily think it is an under budgeting in total. I think it's probably something that we need to look at in terms of the profiling of the spend and the incidence of that coming through. I accept that we do need to do further work on that, and that's part of the programme that we are undertaking. So I think it's something that we absolutely need to look at in terms of working closely with directorates to understand the profile of their spend and how it links in with the various programmes.
Is it related to the fact that we seem to be under capacity in a few areas anyway, so external consultants are filling in the gap?
Like only in part. That this line in the budget, it's one of the pieces we're trying to put some better descriptors against it, because part of this is where we're using external third parties to help deliver some of the projects, so it isn't that backfilling of gaps. There is an element of that, and certainly some of the key projects at the moment have been moving at pace because we've had to bring in some sort of specialist. Mass Transit's a good example, but that all gets recovered through the capital programme. We have a look again. I think how we present our staffing figures is probably an interesting one. We're looking to continue to build on the reporting, as Gary said, as one of next year's targets. And we have previously done some work on staffing budgets, vacancies, and how those gaps have been filled. And I think your helpful continued line of questioning on this is highlighting we probably should do that. And I think it'd probably be really helpful. Maybe we can work, Joe's new into the HR role as well, but it was quite illuminating to see where we'd covered gaps in staffing with either interim people, temporary consultants, or left them to just find their way. So we'll take that way. I'll give that as an action to the team for next year to make sure we do improve on that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from the committee, please? I don't see anyone, so I'll turn to the recommendations on paragraph 2, and I take it Everybody's happy with those? That's great, thanks. So shall we move on to the item 7, the HR management information? Is this, Joe, are you leading on this, please?
Is also very stable at the moment, which is really, really positive. Thank you, Gary. I also wanted to highlight the ED&I papers, the Equality Diversity papers, which show and demonstrate that we are also going in a positive direction. And for the first time, we have in the gender pay gap median managed to get down to 0%, and recognising that is a point in time and we need to continue to work really hard on that. But we still feel that's very positive, and have an action plan to make sure that we continue to build on that and address, not get overconfident about it, I think is what I'm trying to say. We recognise there is some work to do around disability, and that is something that we are focusing on in as part of our AD&I group in our board. I think the final point to highlight, which just really is in line with what both Sarah and Gary are saying, is the focus from my team around workforce planning and that agility piece, and that is something that is a priority. It is something that we are working on as part of the new business planning rounds, and only today we are starting to do some far more in-depth workforce planning, having more agile teams who can respond to work as well. Every single role that's coming into the organisation is scrutinised thoroughly to make sure we do need it, and if there isn't skills that we've already got that we can't move to actually address that. We're on a bit of a transitional journey for that, but that is something that we will continue to do, and I will find a way to report on that if that's required in the papers. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Joe. Are there any questions, please? Susan, please.
Yes, obviously welcome the report. Just like workforce planning, I've often advocated in the past as well for working more closely with our local universities. Bradford University this week, or was it just last week, was announced to be the most socially mobile university in the UK yet again. And it just strikes me that obviously there's, I think it was 73 civil engineering undergraduates there. If we would take every one of those on, because we're so short of transport planners, then that would absolutely improve our diversity of our workforce, as well as giving us a tapping into a really rich talent that we need. So just more closer working with our universities and just making those opportunities for young people coming through, because we really need those skills.
Fully support and massively agree. Our top 5 universities for Equality University here in Bradford, one of them specifically around girls, they are absolutely on our radar, my list, to make sure we build relationships with those people from at every level, from that graduate intake for our apprenticeships for recruitment, full stop, for jobs that we want to encourage them to. Completely agree.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on this item, please? I take it there aren't, so I'll just turn to recommendations again in section 2 of the report, and I take it everybody's happy with those. It's great, thank you. And we'll move on to item 8, which is the employment panel. Alan and Joe, I don't know who wants to speak on this one. Caroline, please, almost right.
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
This is a paper that's come to this committee following a period of consultation and adoption of a new approach by the Combined Authority at its last meeting. Part of that consultation that did take place with members of this committee, so those that were able to take part in that session a little couple of months ago now. Hopefully this is reflecting back, I think, what was endorsed at that session. So we have put in place now a framework for how we deal with the HR procedures that relate to our statutory officers and our most senior leadership team, so from directors upwards, and provided transparency around that. And that consultation has taken place, has included consultation with Unison and has included consultation with the heads of legal and heads of HR at the 5 partner councils as well, and has been supported by all those groups. So I'm really pleased that we've got some transparency and we've got those processes in place. This is playing back to this committee the consequences of that in terms of the setting up of an employment panel, primarily because the employment panel, as you'll see, will be drawn from members of this committee in the first instance. So members of this committee will have a role to play, certainly in the appointment of our senior team, and should it be required in terms of the other HR processes that could come into play. We have, in addition to the membership of this committee, recognising that processes could have a number of stages and we might need more members than we've got availability here, we have put in place an arrangement to have a pool of co-optees to call on. And we are currently in dialogue with each of the 5 councils in terms of nominees to sit in that pool should they be called upon, and we'll be looking to bring that back to the Combined Authority in January for approving that. So there's quite a lot of information here, and there's quite a number of appendices. I'm very happy to take questions on any element of that as members need. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Are there any questions, please? Jocelyn, please.
Yes, am I to understand that terms of reference have already been adopted by the Combined Authority?
Yes.
It's just I had a couple of comments on the drafting, so it's possibly a bit late now. But I did think that that there were a couple of areas where there was ambiguous drafting and it could be possibly made a little bit clearer.
I'm very happy to have a conversation with you outside this meeting, if that would be helpful. There is always scope for us to revise and update our terms of reference, and as this is going back to the CA in terms of the membership in January, if there are ambiguities that we can clarify, we could take that opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Are there any more questions on this? That's great. I'll turn to the recommendations, and I take it everybody is happy to note this report and obviously come back to Combined Authority. That's great. I will close the meeting then, and I'm not here for Combined Authority next week. Happy Christmas, everyone, if it's not too early to say that.